Hello and welcome to season 6, episode 40 of Dualistic Unity. I am in the room in my chair, got a microphone in front of me not because of anything, but these are the things that are actually here next to two people here. And what I mean by that is it's not in my head. That's not the first thing that I'm looking at everything through. It's like this is a device that allows me to communicate with something else, but it's not anything on top of that. And I don't have to show up as something on top of what I'm showing up as. And if I can be cool with that, honestly cool with how I show up, then that's my bar. I don't have to live up to something beyond that or expect myself to be more moment to moment. I can be here actually in the world and see where it goes because I'm not
sure. That's right. Seeing where it goes, and it's always here. Life is happening right here, right now, and it doesn't change locations, which makes it a lot easier to remind ourselves of, because it's very easy to get caught up in the there. And it's very easy to forget the feeling of being caught up when you're having that moment of clarity. And it's very easy to forget clarity when you are in the midst of being caught up. And yet both are available and both mean nothing about you. And both have so much within them. They have each other. And so they kind of remind me of that yin yang symbol where, there's that little white dot in the black side of it, and there's the little black dot on the white side of it, because within one is the other. There is no separation, but there is an appreciation for the experience of both sides because they're here and available. So why not? Why not experience both when you don't judge yourself for being on one side versus the other? And so I'm very happy to be sitting on a chair with you guys. And if at the beginning of this episode I was playing hide and seek with Restream with the eye, I was like, peekaboo. and it happened at the same time where I opened it. I was like, oh, Restream just wants to play a little bit, because play is also available, but so is appreciating the depth of life when it does feel painful or unpleasant, because pain is not something that has to be avoided. It's just another layer to this infinitely awe-inspiring experience.
Yeah, I wanted to go somewhere there. We were talking about it's okay to look at both sides, right? Of both sides of the coin. And I would say that that's absolutely where you're going to find ongoing growth and awareness and empathy and experiences that aren't necessarily in the physical world, but by virtue of them being real to you, they are in fact real. And so we get so caught up in like one side of the coin, and then it's important to look at the other side of the coin. Like I've said in, I think, one of my ebooks that I wrote once upon a time, I think this one's available on Patreon, the importance of balancing your perspectives. And what I mean is, if you tend to lean on the I'm useless, I can't do enough, I'm a piece of shit side, it's really important to recognize that the other side of that coin is equally valid if you're on that side of it. If you're looking at it from that perspective. So if you were to let go of the story that you were holding on to, there is another story that seems equally as valid when you're in the mentality that's willing to believe it, that's willing to hold on to it, in the same way that you are willing to hold on to the darker side of the story. So you see, there's value there, but there's also something to be learned there, because you start looking at all dualistic perspectives, like the teacher and the student, for example, and you start to look at those very superficial concepts, and you start to realize that any teacher who isn't an ongoing student is really no teacher at all. And so student and teacher starts to fade away. But you have to play the part of both student and teacher to recognize that they are not separate, despite seeming separate during the time that you identify as one or the other. And I guess what I'm saying is that the farther down that path you go, the more you are willing to look at opposing and yet complementary perspectives, because they match one another, they play a part with one another. Eventually you end up at the God versus man duality. And that is where you start to really become informed in terms of the relationship between the observer and the observed, in terms of the relationship between the individual and the collective, what it means in terms of predeterminism or free will. These are all dualistic perspectives of what is, including human or God. They are perspectives, and they are valid points of view when you're in those points of view. But when we say valid points of view in terms of being God, you have to remember that's an idea. So now we're talking about valid egotistical points of view, because now you're identifying as God rather than just a mere mortal or sinner if you really want to drag yourself down into the fucking swamp.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But it's the recognition that while both are true, while you are the awareness of the universe and have limitless potential, that does not give you control. That does not make you more valuable. And so while you are both God and man, you are neither. It's not either perspective that's really the truth, but it's in exploring both perspectives that you see the massive spectrum in between, and you grow accordingly.
Yeah. And I think if you kind of hold on to that perspective of like being God and like expressing it like, you know, you're God, I'm God, even like using the word to some degree, like even if you're pointing it at everyone else, no, you're God too. If you're seeing yourself as the one expressing that, it's like there can be this sense of like, I'm God and I know it, and you're God and you don't know it, and therefore that means something. And it doesn't, because like it can, oh my gosh, it can be such a separative idea, that idea, if it is focused on, like even focusing on the word very much isn't, it's not beneficial to your experience at all. Like if you focus on it too much in yourself as something that's separate from everything else, it can make you feel good, but it also creates a really high bar for yourself, like a maintenance sort of feeling where it isn't letting yourself go at all. It's like creating more of a potential to fall. It's like there's a lot of pride involved in that without much behind it, you know, without much backing it up necessarily. If it's just focused on as an idea, I think. And you know, part of me goes back and forth with this because I look back at times where I've expressed it and like had ideas of myself, you know, and look back at things with kind of like a negative tone. And part of me wonders if that's absolutely even the case. We were chatting a little bit this morning about this and how it's almost to get focused on that a little too much is like a component of this, because we've for so long focused on ourselves as an idea, assumed that we are an idea, assumed that we exist not really in the world, but like through a perception of the world. And it's not that being in the world makes anything more certain, but it's like just what it is. It's like it's what it is, instead of it being, you know, veiled by some opinion or some thought or something that you assume means something about you specifically. It's like there's a lot less weight when it isn't, when you're not focusing on that as an idea, like a new idea of yourself.
And there's a lot less risk, you know, because there's you know, when you're focused on the idea of you, everything is going through that filter of that concept. So it's, you know, everyone must be upset with you, everyone must be everyone must like you or hate you, everyone must be working to help you or to hurt you. So, you know, it's like you consider yourself the center of everyone else's experience. And the ironic part about it is that you don't even really make your experience the center of your your focus, because it's your idea of how you assume people feel about you that you prioritize. And so many times I would, get to work early or stay late or take an extra class or pick up pick up another shift because I was trying to control the opinion that I assumed other people would have. So I wasn't even working tirelessly for others. It was for how I thought other people viewed me, which is insane. That I even tried to credit other people for why I was doing the things I was doing. And it wasn't even that. It was what I assumed they were thinking. And so my experience wasn't even my priority. It was it was my assumption about my experience that I prioritized. And that was really relieving to some degree, that it wasn't, that I, as much as I wanted to blame people, it was me that created that experience, and in creating it I could recreate it. And I really appreciated having that realization, because I was a big reader when I was younger, and I have fallen back into reading and I've been loving it. So side note, I love reading. Reading is fantastic because it gives you an opportunity to change your perspective within seconds, right? Because when you're in the midst of a book, you're changing the perspective of the characters, you're changing the perspective of the writing. Is it first person or second or third person? Are we taking the role of the narrator? Are we looking from the perspective of the lead character? Are we looking from the perspective of a background character? Are you seeing the development of the story? And when you are reading, you're able to change perspectives seamlessly because someone is guiding you through those different perspectives. And so when I'm in my quote unquote my life, it's a lot easier for me to take the perspective of my friend Andrew or my friend Ray or someone in the audience, because I very much remember holding that perspective. And so I can hold multiple perspectives at once. And a great way that I was able to practice that is through a love of reading for no other reason than just to enjoy a story. Not to learn something, not to be able to bring that up later and like, well, I read this story about philosophy, and so, I am that much wiser. It was just reading for the sake of reading. And in that, I just got to see that stories can easily be written and rewritten. And so it doesn't matter that for a good chunk of my life, I was living for the assumption of what I assumed was people's perspective. It's that I was like, okay, well, we did that, and now we can start over, go in a new direction. Just like that. Just like you would in a book. And then to some degree, you are the author and the main character and every background character in your story. And you can always just start over.
Yeah. Well, so I guess that's the thing, right? Is that's what we're so used to doing. I mean, that's your typical midlife crisis, right? Is that somebody's invested in a story their whole life, and then all of a sudden they've invested so much that the consequences and the conflict and all of the repression is so obvious that they're like, I need a new story, and they do a massive reset. Maybe they leave their family.
I must have the wrong story,
right? And then it becomes a new story. And it's not that it's bad to explore a new story. As I was saying earlier, it's kind of necessary. Your brain's always going to perceive some kind of story because it's always trying to perceive this character of you and how everything's relative to you. And so you can live on one side of the story where you're a piece of shit, or another side of the story where, you're the most intelligent and wonderful person ever. Right? Like you can do those things. But see, I find it fascinating because in all of the stories in that whole spectrum, there is always going to be frustration, a sense of lack, a sense of disappointment, a sense of need. There's always going to be this sense that you have to get somewhere, that you have to be more. No matter if you're at the total positive perspective, everybody likes me and I'm wonderful. Now you have something you have to protect. Now you have something you're afraid of losing. There is an emotional spectrum that goes with everything that is based on a character, everything that is based on a story. And so I find that fascinating because all of those stories, all of those perspectives inform us when we don't attach to them.
Yes.
But that's why Christians, for example, consider themselves to be sinners. You understand? They're thinking about themselves. And so there is always the threat of hell. There's always that sense of lack, of being unworthy, of not. They're looking at the reality of the conscious dualistic experience and going, no, there's something wrong with that. Obviously, I'm broken. Instead of learning from it, instead of seeing the common factor, which is the fiction of the sinner itself, the fiction of the person that could have sinned, and the idea of a sin. That's why I like the etymology of sin. to miss the mark, to miss the point, because it's not you're going to hell outside of you're going to be confused and you're going to suffer accordingly.
Oh yeah, that sense of that idea and the back and the forth. Like I think being willing to let yourself get caught up and like catch yourself, almost like not try to avoid all of those things like need, judgment, assumption, false certainty, because that can just create this sort of like internal battle where you're like, am I holding on to something or am I not? And that's what your mind's going to be used on, is like figuring out how much or how little you're able to use your mind, how well or how poorly you're living life, how much you're, letting go of or not letting go of. And then based on that, like there'll be kind of a compulsive response to life, like a obsessive compulsive response to things based on those focuses, or what you think you have to get rid of or not get rid of, or what you are assuming you should or shouldn't do or go through. Like a lot of those can be based on that sense of desire, that sense of desire to be liked or not disliked, that sense of a need for someone or something else, and like to get a guarantee, instead of like understanding that those are all in there and they can be something that you can kind of focus on, but then understanding that like you're going to be seeing things through a veil, to some degree. And so, the things that are going on in your head, like don't trust them at face value, because if you trust it immediately, then there's going to be expansion from there. Like that's where mine's going to go, is try to validate whatever assumption, opinion, perception you're holding on to, and like that's what your mind's going to be used for. And the alternative is not using it so much. It's like being informed by things, being able to use your mind. Like there is such a stark difference between your mind using you, and it's not to say it's using you, but like you're just focused on something that isn't happening in the experience that you're having. And so your mind is going to go there. It's going to be there. That's where the whole thing is going to be utilized, as opposed to it being able to be used here, which isn't a sure thing. But it's like, thinking back to being in, when you were younger, in a room at, maybe at school and preschool, early years, you got knocking the door, and those early years, and how there wasn't, like, you were there, you were talking, you were interacting with people, but you weren't thinking about yourself so much. And it wasn't this, because sometimes when my mind does go quiet, like I'll almost have like a fear response, instead of it being like, no, it's still there. Like it's still accessible. It's just I'm not existing in it so much. Like I'm existing here in the world and able to use it more than something that I'm like sinking into and focused on and staring at and looking at, which gives you no sensitivity to the world. And I think the stronger of an idea, or more of an idea, that you're trying to hold on to and maintain, like the more incentive to, be in your head, trying to control what's happening instead of being involved in it, which, there's no guarantee of the future, but like when you're involved in it, that sense of like not having control isn't as frightening. Like there's influence here. You're still fully functional. It's not like you don't have control of like what direction you're going to take a conversation, or like what you're going to say in the immediacy. Like, yeah, to some degree, I have no idea what exact words are going to come out of my mouth, but there isn't hesitation when there's the concern that then kind of separates you from just the ability to express something in even like a coherent way.
Right. But I mean, even when I do feel super clear and concise, and I feel like, damn, that sounded pretty good, even when I'm feeling that, there's no way to guarantee that someone is understanding me and they agree that I sound very clear to them. I feel like sometimes I make no sense, and somebody's like, no, I'm following. That makes total sense. And I'm like, All right, give me a second. Let me catch up to you. Like I just said it, but
There's no way that's
I was
true.
still on the fence, like whether or not that made sense. And so it's like you just don't know. But I actually would. Yeah, no, but I definitely have felt that where it's just you're not so clear, or you don't feel clear, but yet someone else disagrees with you and thinks that you are.
You can go,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right.
Oh,
one
for
second.
sure. Like
I'm away.
even the all right, flying solo for a bit. Even the expression of like not knowing how someone's gonna take something. Like the only perspective of, performance or expression or anything you got to be cool with is your own, like your expression of yourself, because it's a question mark when it's out there, when it's expressed, when you share something. As much as you feel like no, right now I don't feel as shaken so much, and that sense of like control, no control. Like when I stare at it, it can be frightening to think, but it's no control in the sense that I'm saying things and there's no control of like how someone's going to hear it. Like I'm expressing it in a certain way, kind of making jumps, assumptions about how I'm expressing it, what I'm expressing to some degree. And like anyone who hears this is going to hear it differently. They're going to have a different story that maybe resonates with something else that's shared. And so you don't have to hold yourself back so much from assuming that like what the best thing to share or express is, but it doesn't mean that you're like a bumbling absurd person that doesn't make any sense with no ability to like express something or share something, which isn't control, but it's different, because you can start feeling like you're just a babbling buffoon when you worry whether or not you have control and you're not involved in the situation that you're in.
Yeah. Well, this is it, right? And it's important to remember you never had control. We go through this illusion for so long, trying to curate what we say and how it's going to come across, that we forget in the entire time that we're doing that doesn't guarantee shit. But we block that out. That's where that cognitive dissonance comes in, right? Like we've had numerous times in our life where somebody's actually called us out for being inauthentic, or they've called us out, for bullshitting, right? Straight up. Right? And later on, we just ignore that shit. Like, no, it always works. It always works when I cater. I'm a people pleaser, all that shit. And it's just funny because when you recognize it, you realize the only reason there's this fear of losing control is because you thought you could have it to begin with. And if you recognize you never had control, then this is kind of why I say you've always really just been talking to yourself, for yourself. All those people that you've been trying to, you could say manipulate, you could say fit in with, you could say try to establish a relationship with, whatever it is. It really depends on how you want to look at yourself, right? But all of those people have been interacting with you, basically working through your own fears, working through your own needs, working through your own desires. Like when you're talking to somebody and you're being manipulative, you're really talking to your own insecurity. You're reacting to your own insecurity. It is an interaction with your own mind and all your shit. And then you talk accordingly. And that's kind of the point, But when you recognize that, this is why, I say the only person I'm really worried about in terms of like being good with what I do is me. Like if I'm the one who has to go to bed with me at night. I'm the one I have to wake up with in the morning. I need to be able to look at myself and look at my actions and look at my choices and go, yeah. And I put thought into those, and I put awareness into that, and I take responsibility for that, and my life changes accordingly. But it's just so easy to pretend that you're acting for other people when in fact you are acting as a result of your need for other people or your fear of not being enough. Right? That's really what it is. And so again, and I want to make this very clear, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. Like that's the whole point, is that ongoing interaction, that ongoing back and forth is how you learn about your insecurity. It's like when you're talking to somebody at the bar and all of a sudden you say something where you're bragging, and it's to try and cover up that insecurity. Well, you just bragged. right? And see, that's the thing, is underneath it all, you just bragged and you're hoping it lands, right? But that's a moment of honesty. If you can look at that and go, oh shit, I totally just exaggerated that so I can look a little bit better, which means I want to feel better about myself. Oh, am I really still thinking that I lack something? See, there's so much information in that,
Yeah.
right, that you can learn from, but not if you're resisting it, not if you're running away from it. And this is why I find it funny, because so on social media, we post a lot of things, and a lot of times the response that we get from people is abrasive. Not to put too fine a point on it. A lot of people like it, or they'll go, hey, that's dope. Keep it up, guys. Yeah, right. But the comments, the people who actually stop to comment, and it's almost always just this massive paragraph, are abrasive and angry. And of course, if you call them on it later, they just tell you that you're projecting almost every time. But they are, and it's because what you've said, they don't understand. They want to come up with an opinion about it as fast as possible because they feel insecure, they feel threatened, and they don't like the fact that they feel confused now because it makes them feel like less. But there's that opportunity to go, well, fuck, maybe I am confused. Maybe this is something I don't understand. And to actually go, all right, I don't understand. Here's a question. Not, you're an idiot. This is idiotic. And it's like, why is it idiotic? Well, then explain your point to me. It's like, that is not how you get into a conversation, but it is an excellent opportunity to look at why you're doing that, right? And so I will often go, okay, but you're coming across as like super insecure right now. And then they get mad about that. Why do they get mad about that? Because nobody wants to accept that they're insecure. But of course we are, because as I said earlier, the spectrum is a spectrum of identity. And your identity, your idea of yourself is never the truth. It is always going to be suspect. It's always going to be threatened. It's always going to be a source of doubt. And so as long as you're relying on that identity, boom, insecurity is right at your front door. And if you don't accept that, it's because you don't want to question the identity. And that is where you find freedom, where you're just like, oh shit, I'm still defending something. That's kind of dumb, because it is. When you really look at it for what it is, you are defending something that you're not. You're defending something that you're not. You're trying to build something up that you're not. Somebody on Instagram said it the other day. I think it was the Bald Sage, who we've had on the show early on in I think it was season 4. But he was saying, it helps to remember that the person you're thinking about isn't you. Right. And he even said the person that's thinking isn't you. And I was like, it's good. And it's because your brain's constantly creating this new point relative to everything else in order to process context. But that point isn't fixed. It changes across the spectrum of piece of shit to fucking almighty God. Right. That's the point, is to look at that relative point and recognize that it's always relative. It's always relative, so it's never the truth, but it certainly provides more information. And as you explore them all, you see even more gray area, which is fantastic. That's where you become more self-aware in terms of, oh yeah, I can recognize that I'm everything, but everything that I'm looking at isn't everything, right? At all. Because that's an important thing. It really does help to recognize that, but it's like the ego's last shot at survival. No, you're everything. You're God. You're one with all. And it's like, that's not incorrect, except I'm not really talking about anyone. The you that's in that sentence doesn't exist.
No, don't think about that, because it shifts almost that sense of being everything. Like, it hit me yesterday how much that can be in your head, and you can like try and think about everything and have that sense of being able to like control everything, which is fucking insane and will absolutely fuck your life up so good. No questions asked. Like, that's not a maybe thing. It's like, if you're trying to control everything, your life's gonna get fucked up.
Rain in hell, my friend. Rain in hell.
Oh my goodness gracious. Like, it shifts from it being in your head to like everything being, from the point that you're in, like in this chair, I can imagine everything expanding from here, like across the earth in a sense, like from here, where am I right now? in Nanaimo on Vancouver Island, you know, whatever that means, in a location that's like, I'm almost imagining the surface of the earth and like expanding from there, which is happening, like is right now, and everything's unknown there. And so then when you see that, like you are this here, it's not a thought about you necessarily, it doesn't mean anything about you, but the thought of controlling all of that, when you think about it like that, instead of in your head, is ridiculous. And so not having that sense of control doesn't mean that, you know, there's no way to have sway. It's not like someone's going to start moving your arms necessarily. And that gets kind of dicey because it's like, am I choosing? Am I not? But it's totally different to not imagine everything as something in your head, or not imagine you as something in your head, but you that's happening here. And I think the more sure of some idea of yourself, like the more distracted you're going to get from those things, like expressing something about yourself in a certain way, like bragging, you said, for example. Like if you're super sensitive to how uncertain you are, and you know how uncertain you are, like, and you brag at a bar or something, and no matter what the response is, you're probably going to feel pretty weird about that. Like you're going to be hyper aware of it. But if you're really trying to prove yourself, like verbally, there's going to be like a gap between how much you're expressing, trying to, you know, validate yourself, validate your perception. And that's going to be, you know, the lack of sensitivity to a lot of things, not just how you fit into the world, but, you know, even what's happening in your environment, and having that ability not to have social cues in the sense of like looking for the right thing to do next, but like an awareness that's different from social cues. It's like being aware, but not necessarily acting in a specific way because you should. It's like being aware and being yourself, partially because you're aware of how afraid the world is of being yourself. And again, not for other people, but just for yourself, you know, so you can relax and breathe and sleep with yourself at night. Like,
absolutely. I have a real world example that actually happened just the other day when we were in the Nanaimo Carlos O'Brien's karaoke contest. One of the administrators was super uptight. They were very you could tell they were worried it wasn't going to go well, that they were going to go over time, that they were going to basically have someone shit on their head from on high because the job wasn't done correctly. And so they weren't really having that good of a time, despite how well the show went. Mm-hmm. But there was this declaration that the people participating in the show shouldn't be up front in the crowd cheering on the people who are also in the show. And of course, I don't work for this person. And neither do the two of you. And so we're backstage thinking to ourselves, this doesn't feel right. Like it doesn't feel right. To me, this doesn't feel right. I'm not supporting somebody that I know and care about, who does something that I also know and care about, like in a town that I know and care about. Like I'm not in there. Instead, I'm following somebody's rules, and that person is ultimately stressed and feeling a little bit afraid, right? And so often we cater to that, and the ripple carries on accordingly. Suddenly we're tense. Suddenly everything that we do from there echoes that tension. And the alternative was for all of us to go, well, fuck it. And we went up front. And then what was funny is that one of the employees came over and they're like, oh, dude, you know, this person really wants you in the back. Like, you better get back there. And I could feel my old typical, oh, someone's upset with me. And then it dawned on me that it doesn't really matter. Because again, I don't work for this person. There's no consequence. It's not like I'm being inconsiderate, but I know very well that it takes 2 seconds to walk backstage if I'm going to go on stage. I don't need to be lingering back there for 5 to 10 minutes just in case. Because recognizing, again, this person's hypersensitive. They're afraid of not doing a good job. You can see where all of this is coming from. And so I just went, okay, and then didn't go until the person who was actually on the stage came and indicated, like, okay, you're up next. You know, now it's relevant. It's not just a matter of somebody being afraid or being tense or trying to, once again, you know, cope with something that could possibly go wrong in their head, but an actual need. And there I felt that it was appropriate to go. But do you see, at one point, I wouldn't have put any of that awareness into any of that. I would have panicked and went along with everybody else's panic and just fallen in line with everybody else's vibe. Because I would have been thinking like, oh, well, I got to make sure I don't upset people. I got to make sure that they look at me in a certain way. I got to make sure I fit in. I got to make sure that I'm playing the game. I got to make sure that I, rather than actually just wiping the slate clean and going, okay, but looking at all the considerations, what makes sense? Like when I'm not panicked, because you can't assume the people who are calling the shots or making the rules or asking anything aren't panicking. You have to recognize insecurity is always there as long as you are thinking about how you are perceived relatively to everybody else. Insecurity is always a temptation and we run from it. So if that's the case, then everything we've ever been told has to be looked at afresh because it could be coming from a place that is not authentic. It is not genuine. It is not actually coming from a place of clarity or intelligence, but rather is just a knee-jerk reaction to a panic that exists in a fiction only.
Yeah, like mind your fear. Mind your fear, because if you're afraid, if you're tense, if you're not relaxed, like there's gonna be a different set of decisions that kind of make sense based on that, and choices that make sense, almost to not that make sense in the world, in reality, but to soothe, the fear or that jarring sort of feeling or your opinion, to shift your opinion or validate your opinion in some way, shape, or form. And like, if you're tense and afraid and not relaxed, like there's going to be a totally different bucket that you choose to look at. And like, we see it in Instagram comments when someone just doesn't want to look at a podcast episode despite like being so sure of their thought. Like that person is tense. It would make sense to, maybe check out the episode. Like only takes about an hour. It's not a big part of your day. Like from a taking a step back, rational approach to something, like check that out. Maybe there's something that's there just out of a curiosity thing. But if you're trying to prove something, if you're trying to hold on to something, which, a big thing can be that sense of self, your sense of certainty, your sense of, your opinion and preference being the all and everything absolute, like there's a different bucket of choices that you make that are way less sensitive to actually what's going on. But just being able to take a step back and take an assessment for yourself, it takes some faith to do that. Like when we were possibly waiting, we were waiting backstage for a little bit, like there was no, at the karaoke concert, there was like, we weren't any closer to the stage being back there. It was just like that person knows we're in control, but they're basing that choice off of, their fear, their opinion, their desire to, look a certain way. And so from the other perspective, like if you're not so afraid of that person thinking a certain way about you, like you kind of have to let go of that being the forefront. Like if someone's frustrated or doesn't see you positively, like that's okay, because there's more considerations there. And considering everything, like having some people up front dancing, like there wasn't anyone there. So it's like, am I prioritizing the person who wants us backstage, or am I prioritizing the person who's on stage, or am I prioritizing the environment? Am I prioritizing my experience? It's like, it's not just one thing, but it can become a tunnel vision as soon as someone says something like, you should be doing this differently, or you're doing something wrong. Because there's I feel like such a deep sort of response to that feeling like you're doing something wrong, you're doing something incorrectly. And if it's someone who you feel in the moment is like an authority figure, like you're gonna listen to them. And if someone's you're trying to please and constantly please, like you're gonna base decisions off of that. And so I think it's really important to look at, whether you're afraid, whether you feel like you need something, whether you feel like you're lacking something. Because if that is the case right now, like there's gonna be different decisions and choices that make sense that don't as much when you're not trying to be something more, or assuming that you got to like do something that makes you more or maintains your perspective of yourself.
I mean, it's a matter of, I guess it comes back to like your relationship with discomfort. How much does being uncomfortable bother you? What's your relationship with pain? Is it when you feel discomfort, you immediately think, I need to get rid of this right now. This can't be happening, because that applies in every context. We're talking about this person who was uncomfortable with the possibility that they weren't doing a great job. Not that anybody walked over to them. And I'm assuming that nobody walked over to them to be like, you're doing a terrible job. Everything you're doing is wrong. I don't think that happens. And when you look at people, it's like someone did that to them. They're acting as if everything that they're doing is wrong and they're desperately trying to do the right thing. And no one's actually confirmed that anything is wrong. And then if you were to say that to someone, like, did anyone say that anything is going wrong? And they'd almost begrudgingly say yes. Like, yeah, that's a good point. No one's actually told me anything's wrong. I'm just acting like things are completely wrong. And it's that copy and paste mentality where this person might have been doing events previously and they're thinking that contestants are not supposed to be in the audience because they've never seen a contestant in the audience. But we were cheering from behind the stage, which made no sense because it felt like we were louder behind the stage than the people in front of the stage. And it's like, so would you rather have people in the audience being active and excited, or would you rather have all that excitement sound like it's coming from behind the stage and confusing the audience and the contestants and the MC even more?
That's right. Party
like-
backstage.
People start trickling in, then she's got to remove them. All of a sudden, there's like a whole
Singer
crew.
just turns around, starts singing backwards.
Right. That I was just like, I don't think that they even realized that us staying behind stage and doing exactly what would look more peculiar than us moving in front of the stage to cheer. And it's that shit right there that you're like, I don't think you hear yourself right now. I don't think you think the instruction is correct, but in this situation, applying that instruction would look weirder than you're saying not following the instruction would be. And it's that copy and paste, because I've always seen contestants in the back, they must belong in the back. And it's like, just because something has been done that way before doesn't immediately justify it being done in that exact way going forward. And that, traditions we have a tricky relationship with traditions, because I love history and I love the stories of the past, and I love feeling connected to certain maybe ceremonies or rituals, but not treating them like they're the foundation for everything good going forward. Just because we've done it this way doesn't mean we need to still do it that way. And, there was a time where I thought, the best thing you're supposed to do is to find the best way, not realizing that was just my way, and me saying that that's the best way. And so now it's like, I don't want to do what I think is best. I want to pay attention to what seems to make sense. Does this make sense, or does it just make me feel better? Even though as I'm trying to feel better, it's looking way more absurd. But that copy and paste can seem enticing when you think that because someone else did it that way, maybe they see something I don't. But if that's true, it's also true that maybe you could see something that the person before you didn't. And that's why I appreciate so many different perspectives and having discussions and conversations, because and that's why I love chatting with people in any moment, because it's like, I may not know about a topic, but I'm also really excited to ask questions like, oh, I don't know about that. Like, where did you learn about that? And, what excites you about this topic, and what's your perspective? Or even if I'm holding a stance and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to die on this hill, but I really like this hill. So let me know what's going on in your hill. Like, let me know. Let me see, I'd like to take a tour if you'd be so kind as to be my guide. And let's see what led to certain things being held on to, because in that we can see that there's more bridges than walls when we're talking about different perspectives and different topics.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because there's a conversation around that sense of like, and that's there. Oh my gosh, there can be such a sensitive avoidance of talking about just being like what hill people are dying on. It's like, it's a belief. Like everyone's hill individually is like their belief, the way they see themselves, the way they see the world. And it's like, we don't talk about that. It's just like, everyone's got their belief.
You're
Everyone
ruining
let
the
me
party.
believe what I believe.
There's
And
a nice flag on that hill.
right? And it's like, this is This is my belief. This is my perspective of things. And there's all these like individual hills that everyone's standing on, and no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to talk about the fact that it's not really there. Like they're still here in reality, like in, you know, the room and the situation that they're in, no differently than anyone else. Like their thoughts about themselves and the situation that they're in are entirely relevant, but we don't want to talk about that. Like we don't want to have conversations about that in itself, like where it comes from.
Don't
why
betray
we
your beliefs,
do it.
sir.
Oh my gosh.
How could you? Don't even talk about visiting other hills.
Couldn't possibly. Like, oh, to jump from one to another, to this, to that, to let it all go, to walk off the hill, like that's. But then, what would you be? What would you think? It's like you'd be living. You'd be living life, not in your head. You wouldn't be in your head like that. It's like we're in this hill, like trapped in this hill, sort of, but like not trapped. It's just a soothing sort of thing. It's a choice. It is a choice. And you know, there gets to a point where it doesn't make as much sense when you see the payoff, like just straight up isn't there when you're being more honest about your experience. Like the payoff, it doesn't make as much sense to keep trying to defend that. But you know, it's can help you to feel better if you're not feeling great about things
for the short term. And then that quickly goes away, right? But this reminds me of an early discussion that we had in the podcast where we were comparing this hill to a sandcastle, about how people build sandcastles and then they spend all of their time trying to protect it from the waves and protect it from reality. And if you weren't so invested in that castle, you'd have and be the whole fucking experience of the beach. And that's very much what we're saying in this episode. If you weren't so attached to the fiction of you, which is a moving point along the spectrum of all fictions of you, then you would be everything as you are right now, with less conflict in being so. You're already there. You just keep telling yourself a story about it because you've learned to, because we have to at first in order to just start to get a grasp of how to survive in what is ultimately an incredibly complex experience and universe. And as we grow up in that, we do everything we can to keep ourselves moving forward. And for a little while, we need to come up with an idea to feel like we fit in, to keep with the group, so that way we can move forward in safety, and then to have an idea of ourselves that moves us forward towards something else, a carrot and a stick. But these are all developmental stages. They are not the human condition, or if they are, they're as much the human condition as shitting in your diapers. It's something that you can outgrow. That said, this has been a fantastic episode. A lot of fun. Want to remind everybody, we only have a few tickets left for our Port Alberni retreat on November 2nd. Check that out on the website. Likewise, we're going to be back for an episode of Dualistic Unity Raw at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Today, it's Monday. If you're not watching this live and you're free on a Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, join us because we record live every Monday, and we'd love to see you there.
Cheers to that. I really like the sandcastle analogy, and I got all sorts of things going with that, but I'm good with Sharon. I'll save some of that for, you know, Raw later, Patreon maybe later,
or just yourself,
or just me, because I don't have to express every goddamn thing that pops into my head, and that's cool. Can save some for yourself, you know. But this has been a very fun episode. Appreciate you guys a lot for doing it together here and chatting, and I look forward to the next episode.
I know. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Andrew, for holding down the fort as Ray and I exited to take care of an errand, because life is happening now, and sometimes you got to juggle multiple things, but we're always doing our best, even when our opinion seems to indicate the otherwise. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here, and we'll see you.